I believe a large audience is waiting for the right MMORPG to emerge. Believe it or not, those are not the sweet nothings I whisper to myself as I go to sleep at night, just wishing that I haven't wasted a large portion of my life. No, that actually comes from the legendary MMO developer, Rich Vogel. It was something that Rich Vogel had to say in a recent interview from WCCF Tech that brought together several MMO developers that have been part of the industry for decades. Developers that have experienced extreme highs and extreme lows, from Meridian 59 to the recent MMO failures like Project Ghost. Like Greg Street, who worked on games like Age of Empires, World of Warcraft, League of Legends, and more recently saw his MMO Project Ghost cancelled. The aforementioned Rich Vogel, who worked on the very first 3D MMO, Meridian 59, and also continued to pioneer the genre, working on Ultima Online as well as Star Wars Galaxies, and then went on to work on Star Wars The Old Republic and Fallout 76, and more recently saw a funding cut to their own studio, T-0, which was also cut by NetEase. Though that so far has had a little bit of a lifeline as a group of developers has resurrected it and relaunched it as an independent production company. And finally, Scott Hartzman, technical director for EverQuest 1 and 2, and later executive producer of EverQuest 2, but perhaps best known as general manager of Tryon Worlds, the developer that made Rift, a game that sadly didn't get the love that it probably deserved, and is now a shadow of itself. It's a very interesting brain trust to bring together for this interview on the current state of the MMO genre, because it's one that's seen success as well as failure. If you pick through the games that they worked on and you've seen some of their recent projects, there are so many highs and lows there. There is a smattering of some of the biggest successes, some of the biggest revolutions in the genre, and some of the biggest misses in the industry. So I was very curious to see what they had to say about the industry as it is and going forward, especially in the West, given that both Street and Vogel have recently seen funding cuts from NetEase, and Hartzman had advised for NCSoft West. But I'm not gonna sit here and read the whole article to you, because I believe you can read. I think. And also that would bore you to tears. So let me be your ChatGPT and summarize it with a little bit less water usage. A lot of the big takeaways here are that the reality of the genre at the moment is that funding is, well, it's extremely hard to come by right now for MMORPGs. A seemingly obvious statement given that of the people being interviewed, they all got funding and then lost it. Greg Street and Vogel had funding from NetEase. Greg Street was even reassured that that funding was good and that they were going to continue with that funding. They were moving at a really good pace on that MMO, and they were trying to find ways to innovate, and it still got yanked. In the article, they do go on to talk about how publishers love the idea of an MMO for its steady income stream, but hate the cost commitment, especially up front. And there's an interesting bit here on that where Greg Street mentions the cost of content-based live service games, essentially PvE MMORPGs versus PvP MMOs, where that cost commitment is lower for a PvP MMO than a PvE MMO. So that upfront cost and the continued cost of the PvE MMO is going to be a bigger commitment from the publisher than the PvP one. And it makes sense because it's dev-created content versus user-created content. But there's also a bigger risk of flopping when relying on users. Look no further than the myriad of PvP-only live service games that flop year over year. The rocky shores of Steam are awash with dead and dying corpses of would-be extraction, hero shooters, fighting games, MOBAs, and battle royales, let alone PvP MMOs. When you put everything on your players to create your content, when there are no players, there is no content. High risk, high reward, basically. So Greg Street says to find that sweet spot, you want to innovate, but you don't want to innovate too much. If you don't innovate enough, you won't bring in players who already have an MMO like WoW, Guild Wars, or Final Fantasy. But if you innovate too much, you turn off the core MMO gamer. It sounds like threading a needle through an environment that's on fire. Which makes me question the sanity of devs that decide to make an MMO in 2025. But I am always thankful for them trying. So we know the publishers want that revenue. They want that continued stream. I mean, all we have to think about is that Star Wars The Old Republic made over $1 billion. But we also know that those same publishers are not paying, mostly because they're scared that that $1 billion is just not obtainable, that there's just too much risk. So why would I open this video with that comment from Rich Vogel? I believe a large audience is waiting for the right MMORPG to emerge. The reason I opened with that comment is because it's part of a larger section that talks about one undeniable factor. Several MMOs are extremely healthy. World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV have insane numbers of players. Guild Wars 2, year in and year out, has hundreds of thousands of players. For all its issues, EverQuest remarkably is still going and has maintained around a fourth of its peak population from 25 years ago and is still issuing new expansions. Ultima Online from 1997 is also still going and they're still releasing new ideas for the game. Dark Age of Camelot is still going. There are 2 iterations of Final Fantasy Online still going. Guild Wars 1 just launched a Reforged and hit a new peak, all-time peak on Steam. I think the era of MMOs we are entering is a redefining of success. And I think it needs to be redefined from all sides. In this article, Vogel redefines it from a gameplay standpoint. Specifically, he talks about an MMO that is redefined as one that is easy to get into, designed as a mid-core game that offers fun gameplay that does not require huge time investment. And this does sound like the kind of MMO that has the most long-term success potential. I don't think casual MMOs or hardcore MMOs are going to have the most long-term success or the broadest appeal, because if you go too hardcore, you limit your audience too much. If you go too casual, you get a broad but extremely transient audience who don't give a shit after a month. But it goes beyond just a redefinition of the game itself, and this is something that Scott Hartzman touches on at the end of the article, even name-dropping Monsters and Memories in a particularly important quote that I think really drives home where I think the MMO genre is going and why the redefinition of the genre and success in the genre might not just be finding new ways to play, but also finding out new metrics of success. Scott Hartzman said, quote, "It's on us to figure out how to deliver the kind of entertainment that an audience large enough to sustain us is looking to play. In some cases, that means finding a way to succeed with a smaller audience, like Niche World Cults' Monsters and Memories. In other cases, it may mean adapting to definition of what an MMO is and how we choose to express our worlds and systems. I don't think that's bad for MMOs at all. It's all about finding our players and serving them. After all, they're the ones we're doing this all for." This is something I've actually talked about a while back in a video all about what I thought the future of MMOs was going to be. How I kind of thought that future of MMOs was indie MMOs, not the AAA MMOs. And this was even before the big cancellations of things like the Lord of the Rings MMO, before New World got axed. It's why I would move away from saying a large audience is waiting for an MMORPG to emerge and instead say that a large audience is waiting for MMORPGs to emerge, because I think that that large audience is there, but they're looking for their MMORPGs. And I don't think that there is any kind of consensus on what they are looking for. I think that the future of MMORPGs is a redefinition not on peak numbers, but a redefinition on longevity. Because I think that we're looking at a future of MMORPGs where a successful MMORPG may be 10K players, 20K players, 50K players, maybe at best 100, 500K players. And the success of an MMORPG is not defined by trying to be the next World of Warcraft and hit those mega numbers, but by trying to be the next EverQuest or the next Ultima Online and trying to hit those 20-year marks instead. I think there's even an argument to be made that the mega MMO of World of Warcraft is more anomaly than anything anyway. If you really think about it, what other MMOs have ever come close in the first place? My name is Edward Flynn. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. But that's not quite where the story ends. Because unfortunately, there's another part of this whole idea of the MMO genre and where funding is and isn't going in gaming that wasn't really covered here. So I want to talk a little bit about that too. because it has to do with some other MMOs that were canceled in 2025 that we've talked about this year. So let's talk about that a little bit too. And one thing that isn't really touched on in this article was the looming threat of funding shifts that are making funding even more difficult. Is this ever-growing maw of the ever-hungry AI, the gigantic Jabba the Hutt mass of need for funding going into AI that's spitting out like salacious crumb levels of actual revenue coming from it. And if you got those Star Wars size references, you're a huge fucking nerd and I love you. Because for this article, you see they could have very easily brought in another group of developers that had their MMO canceled. Project Blackbird, who created another studio, Project Sackbird. Project Blackbird, the MMO that's being made by ZeniMax Dev, was reportedly being liked by people being made by it, but that whole team was reportedly canceled and cut, basically so we can pay 4 times the cost of RAM. Also, we can, like really make sure that when we play our 25-year-old game, we really make sure we get the most out of it. So many fucking particles. That's worth $900, right? I think I'm really good with my money. You should take money advice from me. Now, to be clear, this isn't to be doom and gloom about the future, but to add a healthy level of skepticism around bigger companies like Amazon Game Studios, like Microsoft, because they are looking at mega investments elsewhere. They've already shown us that. They're making substantial cuts and they're killing off projects, even long in development ones with potential like Project Blackbird and the Lord of the Rings MMO with that gigantic freaking IP. Or even ones that have already eaten the cost and are in the cost recouping phase like New World. It's a new reality for MMO development. If you would have told me to begin 2025 that one of the biggest RAM producers would just freaking stop producing RAM to make data centers, I'd have said you're crazy. But here we are. So this is why, for me, I am pinning my hopes for the MMO genre on these smaller MMOs, these indie MMOs, and I do think that tends to mean that we have to take some adjustments in expectations to kind of make them smaller a little bit. But to end this on a positive note, while 2025 was in many ways a brutal year for the genre, there was a lot of carnage and a lot of cancellations. I have also had more fun playing video games this year than I have in ages. There's a lot of fun to be had out there. Older MMOs, in development ones, RPGs, shared world games, friend slop games like freaking Peak, which was amazing. There's so much to enjoy. So I hope you are finding something fun to spend your time on as well. There's a lot of positive to have. There's a lot of joy to be had. So go find some joy. I'm gonna go accidentally not catch my friend in Peak and let him fall to his death. Have a great one, and I hope you have a good time. Ah! No! Wait! No!
Red!
It's still here! Wait! Don't save me! Ah! You just had to say something, Lat, about